I, for one, think it's absolutely disgraceful that the chair of the OBR is effectively being made to take the blame, being made the scapegoat, sort of forced to resign because there are allegations against Rachel Reeves for misleading the British public about the state of the public finances in order to underpin her tax hike of £26 billion. So, accordingly, the headlines: Reeves tried to scapegoat OBR chief over the budget meltdown, and OBR chief resigns and Reeves clings on. There's more of those and more of that, and I'm also going to prove to you why I think, when you put clips together, why it absolutely sounds like she misled the public on the 4th of November. From her own speech, in her own words, I'll put the clips together, and why it looks, in conjunction with the letter from the OBR chair about the timeline of when things were released, why it absolutely looks like she misled the public, and why I think she should be the one taking the blame for all this and not the chair of the OBR. But as you've probably heard, he's resigned. Here's his letter of resignation. He says that the OBR plays a vital role in the UK's fiscal policy making, and it's critical that the government, parliament and the public continue to have confidence in the work that it does. The inadvertent early dissemination of the economic and fiscal outlook on the 26th of November was a technical but serious error. In other words, they uploaded it and they shouldn't have done, because someone found it just by changing the month and then they could find the document. It was an hour early. And so they say this was a serious error, serious leak. Rachel Reeves was absolutely scolding the OBR for releasing that early because it obviously derailed her budget. Now, it was an hour early. It was going to be released anyway. The information was going to be released in her speech anyway. So yes, it was a technical and serious error that shouldn't have happened. I don't think it's worthy that he should resign over it. But if he should resign, then absolutely so should Rachel Reeves, if she's misled the public as it appears from the clips that I'll show you. So if you like this analysis, at any point during this video, feel free to subscribe and I'll be very grateful. So where do we start first? Well, I'm going to start with the video that I've put together of little clips of her own speech, because what better way to show you what it really sounds like than when you put these clips together. Now, this was, I think it was an hour long or something. It was quite a lengthy speech with questions. So some of this is taken from questions from the press. But I'm going to put this, I've put these together. It's not very long. It's 2.5 minutes out of an hour's worth for, you know, copyright, fair dealing and all that. But I'm going to put these together. And these are the bits where she refers to the OBR, what it said about the outlook, and just so that you know the context, if you're watching this and you haven't seen my other videos or you've no idea what's going on, the OBR did not really say that the British economy was absolutely 20 billion in debt and that she needed to raise taxes. That's not what it said. She also said that it had downgraded the economic forecast, which turns out not to be true. There was no £20 billion black hole. They hadn't downgraded it. In fact, it was in a surplus of £4 billion or whatever. So take a look at this, and then with a straight face, anybody tell me that she hasn't misled the British public over the state of the economy. Listen to this.
And there are longer term challenges too. That feeling, shared by millions of people across the country, that the economy isn't working as it should. Alongside the budget this month, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the UK's public finance watchdog, will set out the conclusions of their review of the supply side of the UK economy. I will not preempt those conclusions, but it is already clear that the productivity performance that we inherited from the last government is weaker than previously thought. A less productive economy is one that produces less output per hour worked. That has consequences for working people, for their jobs and for their wages. And it has consequences for the public finances too, in lower tax receipts. The Office of Budget Responsibility will make their forecasts at the end of this month. But let's be clear about what forecasts are. They're not visions of the future. They're a look in the rearview mirror. The OBR rightly make their predictions based on the data that has gone before. Well, we did increase taxes last year at the budget to fill the £22 billion black hole in the public finances. Chancellor, of course, has to use the independent forecasts of the Office of Budget Responsibility, and we used those last year at the budget, at the spring statement, and at the spending review. But of course, it is their right to change those forecasts. But the most important thing is that we use those forecasts to underpin a budget or a spending review. But I think that everyone can see that this year has thrown further challenges our way. Britain is not unique in that respect. The impact of tariffs, of global uncertainty, weighs on countries around the world. And at the same time, the OBR are choosing this moment to update their forecasts on productivity. Now, I am determined to beat those forecasts, but you have to respond to the independent forecasts that are presented, not just your view of what the future will look like. As I said in the answer to the previous question, if you ignore those independent forecasts and sideline independent economic institutions, what we'll have is higher interest rates and higher inflation. Well, we've had that playbook before, and it was a disaster, and it's not one I'm going to repeat.
So each of those clips, you'll notice she's referring to the OBR, updating their forecasts, £20 billion black hole, looking back in the rearview mirror at what happened and having to follow their forecasts, etc., and underpin what she's going to do next. So those clips, taken together from her own speech, make absolutely clear to me that she's relying on what the OBR said to underpin a tax increase. Let's listen to them again, one by one, and let's break down exactly what we think of them. Listen.
And there are longer-term challenges too. That feeling, shared by millions of people across the country, that the economy isn't working as it should.
So, first indication here, economy is not working as it should. Weak economy, she's implying.
Alongside the budget this month, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the UK's public finance watchdog, will set out the conclusions of their review of the supply side of the UK economy.
So that's hinting at what the OBR will say, alongside what she will say, has now said on the 26th of November. Remember, this was the 4th of November. So she's saying the OBR will set out what they will say, and she will set out what she will say. So she's, again, linking the two intrinsically together. Listen on.
I will not preempt those conclusions, but it is already clear that the productivity performance that we inherited from the last government is weaker than previously thought.
So she's saying, I'm not going to tell you what they're going to say, but it's already clear that everything is weaker than we thought. So it's a bit like saying, I'm not going to tell you, but I will tell you, really. That's what it sounds like to me. Anyone listening to that will hear that. I'm not going to preempt their conclusions, but it's obvious what the conclusion is effectively what she's saying. And then she's saying that underpins what she will do in this budget/spend review. Listen on.
A less productive economy is one that produces less output per hour worked. That has consequences for working people, for their jobs, and for their wages. And it has consequences for the public finances too.
So she's saying weak economy, effect on jobs, effect on businesses, etc. Consequences for the public finances. That underpins what she does with the public finances. Again, all intrinsically linked to what the OBR are going to say and have said. Listen on.
In lower tax receipts. The Office of Budget Responsibility will make their forecasts at the end of this month. But let's be clear about what forecasts are. They're not visions of the future. They're a look in the rearview mirror.
So she's saying what they are going to say is what they are looking back at. So everything that she's going to base her decisions on is everything that's happened to date, to that point. And she's saying that they will make those statements at the end of the month, i.e. those that have now been released. And this is, again, intrinsically linked with her budget.
The OBR rightly make their predictions based on the data that has gone before. Well, we did increase taxes last year at the budget to fill the £22 billion black hole in the public finances. Chancellor, of course, has to use the independent forecasts of the Office of Budget Responsibility, and we used those last year at the budget, at the spring statement, and at the spending review. But of course,
yeah, we know that they repeatedly reference this 20 billion or 22 billion pound black hole, which the OBR said that they cannot substantiate that in facts and figures.
Nothing in our review was a legitimization of that £22 billion. Nothing in our review was a legitimization of that £22 billion.
So he effectively said it didn't exist. But again, we listen on.
It is their right to change those forecasts. But the most important thing is that we use those forecasts to underpin a budget or a spending review. But
again, using those to underpin a budget or a spending review. Now, if we open the letter from the chair, which is this one here, and we go back to what their figures were and the timetable thereof, it was quite clear they were in a surplus in October, and it only dipped to negative at the beginning of October. But again, before that, there was headroom. So again, while she says that they are free to change them, she's implying that it is negative.
I think that everyone can see that this year has thrown further challenges our way. Britain is not unique in that respect. The impact of tariffs, of global uncertainty, weighs on countries around the world. And
so things have got worse, thrown more things our way. Things have got worse, she's saying. She's making that quite clear.
Same time, the OBR are choosing this moment to update their forecasts on productivity.
So on the 4th of November, she said that they are taking this time to update the forecasts, whereas as it was made clear here, there was no update on the forecast because the last one that she was aware of, they're in a surplus at the end of October.
I am determined to beat those forecasts, but you have to respond to the independent forecasts that are presented, not just your view of what the future will look like. As I said in the answer to the previous question, if you ignore those independent forecasts and sideline independent economic institutions, what we'll have.
And so effectively, you get this overwhelming conclusion that the OBR chief is effectively being scapegoated, which is what is now reported in these headlines. So now when we come back to these headlines, they are somewhat scathing. Now, whilst the BBC here says OBR chief resigns and Reeves clings on, they do then quote the Daily Telegraph here. Reeves clings on as OBR chief silenced. Watchdog forced out hours before he was due to give budget evidence to the Commons. And so effectively, he was going to give information that would be against Rachel Reeves. And so thus, it appears he's been forced out and silenced. Now, if we look at the Daily Sceptic here, the OBR says that they warned Rachel Reeves that she was misrepresenting the finances. OBR said that it told MPs that it warned Rachel Reeves she was misrepresenting the finances ahead of the budget and was unhappy about its forecasts were being spun in media briefings because there was little bits of releases here and there. Professor David Miles of the OBR's Budget Responsibility Committee told MPs that the leaks to the press from within the Treasury wrongly suggested that the watchdog's forecasts were fluctuating wildly as Rachel Reeves laid the groundwork for tax rises. Giving evidence before the Treasury Select Committee, Professor Miles said, "I think it was clear that there was a lot of information appearing in the press which perhaps wouldn't normally be out there, and this wasn't, from our point of view, particularly helpful." Asked if it was raised with the Treasury, he responded, "I think it was clear that we didn't find it helpful." Pressed on who it was raised with, he said, "With Treasury officials. I think certainly during the lead up to the pre-measures forecast when there was speculation. Some of these misconceptions, as I've described them, were appearing in the press and we've made it clear they were not helpful and we weren't in a position, of course, to put them right." So they couldn't sort of step in and say, hang on a minute, You're misleading people here. So go off and read that. I think that you'll find very interesting. But also, just very briefly to round off this video, something completely separate, talking about jury trials. I'll talk more about this in greater detail. But speaking of what appear to be misleading headlines and such, we have the BBC here, jury trials scrapped for crimes with sentences less than 3 years. But that's not quite true. It needs legislation to do that. They cannot just wipe it out. That's not to say Labour won't wipe them out, which I think is a mistake. And I don't think we should do that with jury trials. I think we should absolutely keep jury trials. And I think any serious lawyer absolutely understands the need to keep that fairness in our justice system. But it might surprise you to learn that Germany doesn't have jury trials and France only keeps juries for the most serious cases. But is this just the UK trying to copy some of the parts of Europe? Perhaps. But if we look further down in the BBC article here, you'll see the clarification. One word highlighted. Jury trials in England and Wales for crimes that carry a likely sentence of less than 3 years will be scrapped, the Justice Secretary has announced. And even then, it's only if you really know how to read it, because they need to present this to Parliament as new law, and it needs to go through both houses of Parliament, and it needs to get the support. I think doubtless Labour in the Commons at least is going to support it. Many of them may not, but then it's still got to go to the House of Lords as well. And it will require new law. And there's been a lot of sort of speculation as to whether it actually requires new law or not. But even Sir Brian Leveson, when he did his report, upon which David Lammy now bases his U-turn on his own beliefs about scrapping jury trials, when we look at this report of Sir Brian Leveson here, he refers to it as the a proposed Crown Court bench division. So we have here, he said, I will set out the makeup of this branch in more detail in paragraphs below. But in summary, it would be constituted by a judge sitting alongside two magistrates without a jury, which effectively reflects what we currently do with an appeal to the Crown Court. So if you're convicted in the magistrates' court, you can appeal to the Crown Court. You get a judge and two magistrates. That makes up an appeal bench. You don't get a jury when your case is effectively a rehearing in the Crown Court if you appeal from the magistrates' court to the Crown Court. But you don't get a jury in that instance. You get a judge and two magistrates. And so it is effectively a rehearing. Some people say you're already on the back foot because you've already been convicted once, and that does sort of, weigh against you, but it should be a rehearing of the evidence. But nonetheless, the proposed is a bench division of the Crown Court, where he says, or he references that in some capacities, the judge can sit with up to 4 magistrates. That's in appeals. Although this recommendation would clearly require primary legislation to implement, there's already a clear precedent for magistrates to serve as judges in the Crown Court. And there's a number of references to new legislation. These matters can be addressed within primary legislation that would be needed in any revisions to the criminal procedure rules and criminal practice direction that would inevitably follow. In other words, it needs primary legislation. So there has been some speculation about that, but it would, at least in my view, it would require primary legislation to make all of these changes solid. That's not to say that they don't just make sweeping decisions and they end up being challenged in court, but we're in somewhat uncharted territory, at least for the last 800 years or so. Let me know what you think about that in the comments. I think it is absolutely nuts to even think about scrapping jury trials. That is not the answer to fix this broken justice system. It is not the answer to get rid of the backlog. It is not the answer that we need to clear these things. And I think it's a Labour peer that said it's a terrible way to justify this by referring to rape cases, and that some of them will be waiting years. That is the wrong way of looking at it. We should absolutely be prioritising the most serious cases. They should be heard as quickly as possible, but they should be funding the criminal justice system if they want to clear these backlogs. In fact, given that we spend more money on illegal migrants to the tune of £5.5 billion, whereas we spend about £5 billion on the courts and legal aid service, I think we should reevaluate those things, and the money should be going into our own court system in order to remove that injustice. But that's just my view. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and thank you for watching.